Hello, everyone. Many of you are very familiar with the late management guru, Clay Christensen, who had a tremendous impact on our industry with books such as The Innovator's Dilemma. Today, I want to point you to his wonderful treatise, How to Measure Your Life, and in particular, this quote. As such, there is no one-size-fits-all approach that anyone can offer you. The hot water that softens a carrot will harden an egg. Today, I want to urge you all to beware a one-size-fits-all approach to product management. Yet many product teams fail to understand the basic concept that a one-size-fits-all approach will not set them up for success or their organization. Why? Time and time again, we as an industry are guilty of using the same set of approaches, the same set of frameworks to different organizations, different cultures, in different industries. We need to shift our thinking away from believing teams are collections of interchangeable individuals with certain skills such as product management or user experience that will succeed as long as they use the right process. Instead today, I'm going to argue that we need to understand that different organizational contexts require different actions and different behaviors. So who am I to say this? I previously ran The Guardian's global engineering, product, and data teams. During this time, The Guardian moved from a print-centric, UK-centric organization to a global digital powerhouse, and we laid the foundations for important commercial success. I've worked for large organizations, small startups. I've worked for the satellites of US operations, and I've been in the UK mothership for companies expanding overseas. I've worked in legacy companies who are embracing very uncomfortably the concept of digital, and I've worked in product and tech-first organizations where nobody has any questions about the role of a product manager. Today, I spend my time on boards of several companies like Clark's Shoes, but as I love product and engineering, I work hands-on with many, many teams heading up Europe with the wonderful AKF Partners, which is a small scaling technology product consultancy, which the team aren't consultants, we're all former CTOs, CPOs, CEOs. So as you can see, I have the advantage of some gray hair. I've had a ringside seat of many amazing product teams, and I have to confess I've learned the hard way from making numerous mistakes along the way. Now, unfortunately, one of the common themes that I encounter all the time from CPOs and CTO is how hard and painful they find building a product and team culture and organization within their company. In fact, it's not uncommon for the product managers to feel like the most unpopular people in the organization. I don't know, does anybody feel like that in their organization? Yeah, I see some nodding heads. Now, feeling unpopular, might not want me to say this, but feeling unpopular may not necessarily be a bad thing. A product manager's job is always going to make them unpopular some of the time. Your role is to balance the business needs and the user needs, and you cannot make everybody happy all the time. But when do you know that you're bumping up against normal resistance versus creating a pressure cooker of declining trust and growing resentment? Now, it always tends to start the same way. There's a new team, a new leader, a new proclamation from the CEO, and love for all things product grows. But after a period of time, the rest of the organization comes to realize the full implications of having a strong and product engineering function. And when that happens, product team love tends to diminish. Now, if you're lucky, you can spot this and quickly course correct. If you don't, the situation only gets worse. So many of you are probably sitting there and saying, that's not going to happen to me. I'd spot that. Well, let me tell you the story of a CTPO of a large legacy B2C company. Now, this CTPO and her team were really proud of their achievements. They had moved to best-in-class software development. Revenue, user engagement had reached record levels, and there was a new strategy that the team were really enthused about. Sounds great. And then the CTPO went off for an executive away day with her peers, and at that event, one of the most senior and respected members of the exec team stood up and gave a speech. And in that speech, he said the introduction of product management and agile software development in their company was a threat to the culture, was a threat to retaining key talent in areas such as sales and marketing, was a threat to the very being of the organization because staff had no desire to turn into an Apple, a Facebook, or a Google. This CTPO was stunned. She thought the organization were proud of her successes and were more than comfortable with the new ways of working. How could she and the team have read the situation so wrong? Now, subsequently, when they were trying to unpick the problems, they realized that when the team talked about the role of product management, the organization felt that their roles and responsibilities were being taken away. When her team talked about process, the organization felt that it was just an excuse to brush aside their opinions. When the team said, "This is how you do great software development," the organization felt they were acting in a cult-like mentality, worshipping at the altar of Agile. And that's a direct quote from a CEO, a frustrated CEO who I spoke to just 2 weeks ago. It appeared the team were doing everything right in terms of building great products, except they were failing to take the organization along with them. So how do you know if you and your teams are not aligned with the rest of your organization? Well, the truth is, you probably already suspect it. You have a feeling in the pit of your stomach. You kind of glimpse it in the face of somebody as you're talking to them at work. But as well as those sort of pit of stomach feelings, do you recognize any of these? Is there talk of setting up a PMO, a project management office, in your organization, or discussions about how can you have more governance? I hate to tell you, but in my experience, that is a sure sign that something is not working. Or what about, are there painful conversations about who owns the customer? Or you can't put forward essential platform and tech debt work because, frankly, there's no support for it outside your department. Or finally, do you find yourself having debates with people in your company about things like Agile, MVPs, discovery? How do product teams get themselves in this situation time and time again? Well, last year, I had an amazing reaction when I talked about 2 dominant groups that I often see in product management today. The first, I call this group the optimization optimists. Now, this is a group who are overly confident in their view of the world. They don't feel any compulsion to have a great product strategy. And the result, they're stuck in a constant cycle of optimization, which offers little more than diminishing returns. But it's this other group that I want to highlight more today. This is a group I call the framework fanatics, and this group make process rather than outcomes their North Star. Now, as a discipline, we are spoiled for choice with frameworks and approaches. And I have to confess, there is nothing more than I like than a great framework to simplify a problem. But Product management is not painting by numbers. Frameworks, rituals, approaches are a guide. They are not the solution. In this model, the what we do and how we do it becomes the focus. And it should really be about the impact of the work. Under this model, there is often very little regard to the environment of the broader organization. Now, I read a great book recently called Team Topologies by Pays and Skelton. I don't know if anybody else here has read it. Really good book, highly recommend it. And they talk about how do you organize software teams for effective working. One of their key themes is about how to manage the cognitive load of a team. Too much cognitive load, and a team becomes less efficient and less effective. But pause for a second. Think about the cognitive load that we, as product teams, bring to the organization and departments outside product and engineering. Unless you work for a digital-first company, I bet many of you are working with people who have never come across a product manager before. Or they probably have little understanding of software development. I hate to tell you this, but for many of them, their view of technology is a more traditional service IT model. That's the closest they've got before. So I believe product managers and product teams need to have an adaptive approach. And today I want to share with you a new model on adaptive product management and the modes of product engagement. It's very much a work in progress. This is like the first official time I'm showing it, so I would love feedback, so grab me later today. Now, the objective of this model is for teams building products to realize that it's not just about doing it the right way, but it's also about the ways of doing it right. So with every good model, there are going to be two axes. First, the x-axis. This x-axis is about who has the closest relationship to the customer. On the right, you have product teams. On the left, you have teams outside product. Now, the second axis, or the y-axis, looks at the type of organization and product. This actually defines whether you as a product team make the actual product or not. At the top, there's a pure digital product where the product team control all aspects. And at the bottom is where you as a team are not the product. Now, let me help give this a bit of color. Let me explain from my own career. At the top, you would have eBay, no inventory. Everything is purely digital. Everything is under the umbrella of the product team. But towards the bottom, you would have The Guardian, because actually, the journalism is the product. Let me give you some examples to bring this to life. So, bottom right, this is when the product team is close to customers, but is not the product. As I mentioned, that could be The Guardian. It could be a retailer, for example. It could be Clark's, could be John Lewis. I like to call this group product amplifiers, because one of their core objectives is to amplify their products to ensure there's more reach, more engagement, and more revenue. If we move in the opposite direction, top left, this is where the product team is not closest to the customers, but it is the product. A good example here, I think, is Facebook's workplace product. I like to call this group product partners. The team here, in this example, that spends most time with customers is really the sales team. Bottom left, the third group are neither the product or the closest to customers. For example, it might be a manufacturing company like engineering firm IMI, or maybe, let's say, a truck manufacturer. The firms in this quadrant are likely embracing product management for the first time, and it's often really a small part of their operations, but it is becoming increasingly important. I like to call this quadrant the product enablers. And finally, the fourth group is where you are the product and you are closest to customers. Lots of examples here. Let's say Facebook, it could be Google AdWords, and I call this group product thought leaders. Each quadrant tries to recognize the different stresses and strains on the different types of product teams. The process for delivering software may be very similar in each quadrant, but we kid ourselves if we don't recognize the need to empathize, evolve, and adapt. So what are the common pitfalls that I see very regularly in each one of these quadrants? Let's start with product amplifiers, bottom right. Unfortunately, this is a very common problem where the product team is perceived, rightly or wrongly, as setting up product management in competition with the real product. Product partners, again, top left, they often end up battling with the organization as to who owns the product, who owns the customer, who owns customer understanding, who owns customer prioritization. Now, in this quadrant, you may actually have two customers. There may be the people who buy the product, and there may be the people who use the product. Now, it could be that the product team knows the end user better than anybody else, but you cannot ignore your colleagues who are dealing with paying customers day after day after day. Product enablers, as I said, are in organizations that often really just don't understand product management. They might not even understand digital. Now, a common mistake here is not taking the time to educate the organization. And when I say educate, I don't mean just tell them. You've also got to show them. Often one of the best things you can do if you're in this quadrant is get your exec team out of the building and show them what great product looks like in other organizations. Finally, the product thought leaders. Well, we're probably all thinking life must be pretty darn easy for them. Unfortunately not. I have spoken to many a CEO who is frustrated because their ace product team is just not stepping up on strategy, and they're stuck in constant optimization or execution. Yes, they have turned into optimization optimists or framework fanatics. Now, I recognize models make things simple, and the truth is there's probably elements in each quadrant that kind of resonates with many product teams. For example, I would say it is the role of every senior product person to do thought leadership. But it is unlikely that you can do this really successfully if you have not laid a foundation of trust and credibility. Hence the emphasis also on amplifying, enabling, and partnering, as well as thought leadership. Sorry, I've just got stuck. And for some reason, my next slide is not appearing. Ah, thank you. Oh, no, hold on, we've gone way too far there. All right. All right, give me 1 second. The screen is not kind of making up for the common pitfalls. Right, we've just done common pitfalls. All right. A team might have different teams in different quadrants. Now, I feel rather nervous with my next example because we've got Gibson sitting here, so he might end up completely disagreeing with me here. So I would say that in the early days of Netflix, the early days of streaming, Netflix is clearly in that top right quadrant. But as it's matured, you could say that the content strategy has become one of the main strategic drivers. So rather than the mode of delivery. So therefore, has it shifted into the product amplifiers quadrant? I would probably argue that it now lives in two quadrants. One in the product amplifiers quadrant, but also in thought leadership due to the incredibly important strategic work around personalization and recommendations. And it's likely those teams will work somewhat differently. So once you've identified your quadrant, what does it mean for you? Here are some of the key attributes that I think product managers, product teams need to have front and center, depending on their specific quadrant. So ask yourself, once you realize where you are you doing these things? I would argue these are must-haves, not nice-to-haves. So, if you want to do more, here are some examples of some type of actions that you can take, which I've seen put in place that can be pretty darn successful. So, for example, if you are in product partners, look to establish joint customer discovery with shared KPIs. If you're in product thought leaders, look to ensure your operating model has an overt strategy process. If you're in product enablers, make sure you have a stream of educational work that helps the organization understand what you do. And finally, if you're in product amplifiers, consider other roles that could potentially be part of the sprint team, for example, having non-traditional experts as part of the process. So, as you leave here today, there are 8 things, I'm afraid it's 8, that I would urge you to do. For example, let's start off. Number 1, understand your context. Recognize the need for adaptive product management, work out where you and your organization fit, and really think about the cognitive load that you bring to your organization. 2, avoid disconnection. Beware of those warning signs that we talked about. 3, ensure shared goals. If you don't have shared goals, get some. If you are not aligned on this, you will likely fail or at least run into problems every step of the way. 4, have communication as part of your strategy. Now, this needs to be an overt task. It should be in people's job specs. It should be in roles and responsibilities. It should be an item on your one-to-one agenda with your manager or with your team. Make sure you are talking about how you best engage shareholders. 5, deliver a collaborative strategy process. As I said, every great product team needs a great product strategy. But it won't necessarily be as successful as you want it to be, and if you try and do this in isolation. 6, adapt working processes to suit your environment. It may sound small, but for example, inviting other departments to come and sit where you have the product and tech team, or inviting people to attend stand-ups. These are small steps, but actually can have a huge impact. 7, as I've mentioned, consider adaptive roles. Now, when we look at our industry, often the most successful teams are the most cross-functionals. So think about, would you benefit in your team to have an expert on the core product, whether that core product is journalism, it could be a physical product like a shoe. For example, it might be an actuary if you work in an insurance company. Now, one quick word of warning. If you do embrace sort of non-digital roles within the sprint team, you have to be very clear on the roles and responsibilities. I've seen many a time when a stakeholder has been invited to be part of the team, which is a great step, but the role is not very clear. So one of 2 things happens. This person may slip into supervisor mode. And once they slip into supervisor mode, well, people get pissed off pretty darn quickly. The second thing that often happens is that they may actually end up falling into the sort of role of being a go-between. That slows things down. You need people in the room who are going to make decisions and do work. Finally, put data front and center. It is very difficult to change an organization if you are debating opinions. Data is your savior here, so use it. A couple of final provisos. I'm not asking you to become soft and compliant. What you need as a product team is alignment and collaboration. You do not need consensus every step of the way. Not everyone has to agree with everything, but they do need to have input. And I'm secondly, and this is very important, I'm not asking you to compromise on the spirit of small, autonomous teams. Team bloat is a very expensive anti-pattern, and large teams do not build trust. There's actually lots of evidence and research on this. But if you were to do one thing from leaving today, I would urge you all to think about your communication. I have yet to meet a product team that does this too much. Regular communication is often neglected, but is probably the easiest, fastest, and cheapest way of reducing the cognitive load that you bring as a department. Just remember, you're in the business of softening carrots, not hardening eggs. Thank you very much. Just to let you know, some of my slides are up there if you want to, if you didn't take a chance to take any photos. Thanks a lot, everyone.